You and I met several years ago at a complexity conference. I think we did it online. We were talking with
It was
several
it,
folks.
it was Garth
Yeah.
Jensen's DoD complexity group.
Yeah, and that's hopefully that's still going strong. I know
Yeah,
the
yeah,
DoD is in desperate need of understanding complex adaptive systems as they are in understanding John Boyd's observer oriented decide act loop. There's one delta that you and I had, and that was my understanding of how do you navigate a complex environment through data. And let me just give you my perspective. And I think it's shifted since you and I last met. That is, my view is informed by the Cynefin framework, which says basically you can only find the relationship between cause and effect in retrospect in a complex environment. My view has shifted a little bit. I believe there are patterns in complex adaptive systems. And I just want to get your take on that and see what you're doing with the latest and greatest in science of both artificial intelligence and data science.
yeah. Well, yeah. Again, fellas, thanks for having me onto the forum. Whenever I have these kinds of discussions, it's always great because it always reflects whatever, kind of like what you just said, Ponch. It reflects my what I'm thinking about today in this space, because it is it's so rich for being able to do something useful. And so we're doing national security work, and we are, as far as I know, we're the only or one of the only organizations that is attempting to apply complexity science principles in a measured and uniform, consistent way to complex systems across the national security landscape. And as far as your question goes, Ponch, we are. I'm sorry, I spaced on your question.
No, just to remember that when you and I met, I looked at complex adaptive systems as a way where you couldn't understand the patterns in the system, right?
Yeah. Oh,
And then
patterns. Yeah.
patterns,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
that's changed a little bit. We're hearing things, and let me just give you more context. In the last few weeks, we're hearing that entropy is geometry, geometry is entropy. There's a lot of things that are
Yep.
coming out of quantum physics, quantum mechanics, string theory, quantum entanglement, and so my view has shifted slightly, saying that I
I
believe there
see.
are patterns that we just because we don't see them doesn't mean they're not there, right?
Yeah.
So
I.
so yeah, that's
Yeah.
kind of
I would tend to buy into that hypothesis. Uh, However, we have yet to identify consistent patterns within complex systems, which um, can then be turned into actionable insights. But I know you guys talk a lot about the golden ratio, and have had people on to talk about dynamics within the stock market, and up 2, down 3, up 5, down 7, and it has the what is it, the Fibonacci sequence embedded into it, and things along these lines. I'm I'm willing to entertain the hypothesis, but we've not discovered any kind of a consistent pattern like that. There could be ways of looking at the measures that we're creating and doing like Fourier space transformations in order to gain insights. But again, we've not explored that. We are probably taking a little bit more of a linear, direct approach to applying complexity science to having organizations gain better, faster situational awareness than what you guys tend to espouse. But one of the reasons why I was really looking forward to this is to see if we can, link the kinds of things that we're doing and put it into a more a richer orient John Boyd framework, which is a lot more nuanced than just the typical like OODA loop. Just do
right.
things better, stronger, faster. There's a lot more nuance to that.
So building on that orientation, and which is important because that's how we're going to build a better understanding of the natural world, the consensus reality space, however you want to frame it. But we talk a lot about entropy. We look a lot of talk a lot about complexity. I don't think a lot of DoD leaders understand complex adaptive systems. When we talk about entropy, generally it's connected to the second law. Sometimes it's connected to Shannon's entropy information theory. And where I'm going with this, I just want to build up a context so you can kind of talk us through how your orientation, how you would help people, and how your technology helps leaders understand complex adaptive systems. You get the law of requisite variety.
Yep.
We're looking at things from attractors. We're looking at affordances from Gibson. All these different things, people are hearing us talk about. They're going, "What the hell are you saying?" So, walk us through how you create an orientation, help develop an orientation for leaders who are trying to understand complex adaptive systems or complexity.
Sure. And do you mind if I take a moment just to have a little background on this,
Yeah,
perhaps?
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. When I started my business back in 2018, we're using a technique that's called process mining. And for those in your audience that may be unfamiliar with process mining, it's a way of examining processes in a more objective manner, where you're using data, specifically like system data, system event logs to model processes. And the way it was originally developed was for organizations, businesses, to model the processes which run the business. And all businesses run on systems like an ERP system or an HRIS system, a CRM system, on manufacturing systems, on and on and on. All these systems create event logs from which you can model processes. And so that was our original direction, was to do this kind of process mining and process modeling. It quickly became apparent to me as a young entrepreneur that just putting out a shingle and saying, "Hey, let me model your processes," that was going to be very difficult, because organizations are very protective of their data, and so getting access to organizational data was not going to happen in the short run. So we started thinking about, well, how else can we use this technique? And it dawned on me that you can also model the world as a process. And all of the naturally occurring emergent systems that we live in and that affect us and that we affect can all be thought of as emergent unfolding processes. And so we went to see how can we apply this exact same process mining technique to the world. And one thing that's very different from naturally occurring processes, from like linear, relatively linear administrative operational business processes, one of the things that's very different is that naturally occurring processes don't tend to have the same consistent relationships from one process activity to the next. And you can only imagine, there's a process for breaking down a rifle, or a process for breaking down a pistol. There's a process for hiring people, on and on and on. These processes tend to be relatively established and predictable, whereas naturally occurring processes are not. Moreover, they're changing all the time. And so this got us to not abandon, but to adapt our process examinations, from going from a probabilistic, well, you go from activity A to activity B to activity C, to looking at how the process changes over time. And this got us into looking at the changing complexity of processes and measuring, you said it, Ponch, the information entropy of processes. And depending upon how many process activities are present at any given moment in time, and all of these are, the way you measure the way we measure processes, you can measure it at the daily level, the weekly level, the monthly level. You can measure it a whole bunch of different ways. But it goes to the law of requisite variety. And so we're measuring the variety of activities within an overall process, but also the variety of activities that are present at any given moment. And it's that variety where you can calculate the information entropy of processes at any given moment in time. And as the process changes in complexity, it has something to say about what is happening, right now we're also connecting it to human cognition, and I'm happy to unpack that more. But let me hit pause on that to see what
Yeah.
kind of reaction you have.
No. So immediately, I think what just happened for me is in your explanation is when we talk about the OODA loop, we usually use a boundary and put a boundary around a system and define that system. What I hear you saying is you're identifying the patterns or processes. So the implicit guidance control processes, if you want to call it that, IGNC, that's happening within the system. And that tells you as that changes, that's giving you an indication of what's happening on the external environment. And those are my words. I'm just trying to kind of visualize this thinking. Before, I was thinking that you were busy trying to map the external world. But what I think I'm hearing from you now is you're trying to map the internal world of the system that you're looking at, correct?
Well, I guess it's both.
Okay.
I think it's mapping. So one of our applications, we're actually calling it cognitive terrain, but we're measuring what we can observe in the external world. So
Mm-hmm.
we're observing events in the world, and we are calculating the entropy of various different systems
Okay.
which those events reside in, and then we're making a inference about the cognitive state of the people who are either experiencing the system,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll give an example here in a moment. People who are either experiencing the system or the people who are driving the system. And so, for example, so what we're doing is we're measuring global events that are as being reported in global news sources.
Okay.
So we're leveraging a data set that some in your audience might be familiar with. It's called the GDELT data set, which stands for the Global Database of Events, Language, and Tone, GDELT. It's sponsored by Google, or partially funded by Google. And by the way, it's a 100% free data set that anybody can access. It's very robust. And so what the GDELT data set does is every 15 minutes, it goes out to thousands of online news sources, and it harvests all of the news that has been published within that 15-minute period of time. And so those guys are doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and they're grabbing all of these articles, and they're machine translating them, and they're identifying in the articles who the actors are, what took place, and they're characterizing these articles in a bunch of different ways. Okay, so we're riding on top of this data set, and we're segmenting this into a whole bunch of different systems, right? And we're looking at it globally across all the countries of the world, and we're drilling down to the state level or the province level and down to the city level as well. All right, so the activities or the events that they're recording are things like a diplomatic meeting, crop burning, small arms fire, civil unrest, ethnic cleansing, trade deals, on and on and on. They're categorizing all of the events that are being recorded in the global news. These are the activities that
Mm-hmm.
we are calculating entropy on top of. Okay, and so those are the external observations that we are using. Okay, but now think about the government leaders or the local populations that are part of these systems, right? The local populations are the people who are experiencing the systems,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, crop burning is something that happens all over the world at relatively predictable moments, right? And when crop burning is happening and there's other agricultural related phenomenon happening that's being recorded in the news, the people who care about agricultural systems, when the entropy is high, those people are more likely to be cognitively overwhelmed, or they're more likely to be stressed out due to the activities that are within their system of interest. And the same thing could be for the transportation system, or the forestry system, or the education system, or the energy system, on and on and on, right? So as the variety increases, as the entropy increases, on average, those people are more likely to be cognitively stressed out. I'm not saying that people are running around sprinting with scissors like,
Mm-hmm.
the sky is falling. I'm just saying that on average, they're more likely to be overwhelmed than otherwise. And so those are the people that are experiencing systems. But there's also people who are contributing to or who are driving the systems. And so we're also looking at it from a different perspective, where you have actors on the world stage, countries, non-state actors who are contributing to these systems as well. And depending upon the variety of activities that China's involved in, Iran's involved in, the United States is involved in, it has something to say about the cognitive state or the intention of actors who are contributing activities to the system. And the more activities or the greater variety of activities that a country or an actor are contributing to a system, the more the more challenging it is for them to do so. It is a lot harder to have nuanced diplomacy than it is just to treat everything like everything. All you have is a hammer and everything's a nail. That is easier from a complexity standpoint than it is to have a more nuanced diplomatic laydown. So anyway, that was a lot of stuff, but I'm hoping it makes sense.
No, to me, I'm going to check in with Mark here in a second. This kind of reminds me of the narrative-based approach to understanding the disposition of a complex adaptive system. That is, the stories, the anecdotes that you hear from folks, the stories that people tell at home, the stories they tell their friends and family when they are outside of work, gives you the dispositional state of the system. So it's and then you have them self-signify those experiences, and that gives you more information about how a system is situated. This sounds very similar to that, very similar in a way, but you're using it's called GDELT, right? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, GDELT is the data set, correct.
So these stories that are being told, they could be manufactured, they could be from AI, there's a lot of things that could happen, and I'm not saying that they are at the moment.
Right.
But that's the best we have at the moment to help us understand the disposition of the nature of the entire system, which we call the universe. We'll call it the universe for now. But you can focus in on an area and say, hey, this is what's emerging out of this portion of the state of Georgia or the country of Georgia, right? Or the EU or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So that's only available because of what Google has at the moment, right? That's we talk about affordances on here. The only reason you can do this is because there's this capability, this thing that exists, this medium that exists, right?
That is true. We are riding on top of a capability that another organization is providing. Yes.
So you're building the snowmobile. You're taking things and this is a Boydian thing, right? Something emerged over here. We have this. I can't think of the name right now, but I'll call it affordance right now. So these snowmobiles are being created out there. You're building another snowmobile from that, and you're probing to see if it works. So to me, there's nothing wrong with this. This is a somebody taking a novel approach to understanding the disposition of a system or systems, using what I'll say is a known approach, which is using the narrative of that landscape. So I'm gonna kick it over to Moose, because I think he has some questions and possible other applications on where this could be used. Moose, your thoughts on what you're hearing?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the impression I get is that there a lot of times when data is aggregated, it's like John was saying, you start to have hammer and nail syndrome because things in the aggregate become too generalized, and we think what works in one data set works for everybody within that. But as economists and those who have studied things like Austrian economists and Hayek and others, we know that's impossible because we're human. And to Ponch's point, we are complex adaptive systems, and even in the sort of the tribal collected orientations of a Marine Corps or a city or a state or whatever, we're still all unique and different. And it seems like John's approach is trying to account for that, but at the same time, try to avoid some of the pitfalls, as you said, John. I mean, you're concerned with the nuance. You understand that there is nuance and differentiation.
Yeah, 100%. We're not making any kind of a claim that we are measuring everything. And in Destruction and Creation, Boyd talks about the Heisenberg uncertainty principle and Gödel's incompleteness theorem, et cetera, et cetera. We're not measuring everything. Google's not measuring everything, even. Just to just to take it to that level, right? Even Google is not measuring everything. But we're measuring global news, but we're not measuring anything that's happening within social media, which is its own separate ecosystem. We are, however, making the point that the news events that are being published are more likely, again, very important words, are more likely to reflect what is happening, at least on the ground in reality, than what's happening in social media. Moreover, the global news events that are being published tend to be one of the major inputs into social media. It's not the only input, so people challenge me on this. That's not true. And I'm like, listen to my words carefully.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying that, news events, people take URLs and they pop them into their social media. And so it tends to be an input into social media. So
Right.
what we're measuring, I think, tends to be, on average, a leading indicator of the kinds of things and the churn that happens on social media. So that's one of the directions that I would like to go with our technology, is for people to take it and think of it as like a leading indicator into a lot of what winds up transpiring on social media, because it's stuff that happens in the real world on average. Yeah. And like you said, Punch, it's not that there isn't fake news promulgated on global news sites. I'm not saying that either. So, but because global news sites tend to have an editorial policy and publishing standards, it's more likely to find things that are relatively that are closer to ground truth than in other types of systems like social media.
So go ahead. So as a quality of data, this is fascinating.
This is interesting because I've had a lot of conversations about a lot of topics, and Ponch, we were chopping up some of these yesterday. I think the one thing that when you talk about news and things of that nature, people don't realize that their orientation is being influenced and hijacked by external forces of someone or some group or something that has an agenda that you inherently become part and parcel to without realizing, because like Boyd said, you don't have the ability to smash your mental models and create new ones, because you're looking at the world the way someone gave it to you, not the way that you might feel it or challenge it. Kind of a corollary topic, but Sarah and I were watching a thing about Ayn Rand the other night, and it was Mike Wallace interviewing Ayn Rand in 1959, and like part of it makes sense. You're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. But then you start digging into it and you start putting in like complex adaptive systems. So you start looking into it, you're realizing that actually what she was talking about was extreme linear rigidity, which doesn't account for the things that you're talking about. The fact that like the world is complex, it's nonlinear, it's asymmetric, right. It's nuanced.
Right.
And I think that even in like her extreme, we still are subject to so many of these things that whether it's a corporation or whether it's a news media outlet or whatever, they're still trying to force a frame of thinking that ultimately is linear or brings you down to some sort of a binary flow chart that if I do this, then this, if I do that, then that. And that's not how it works. That's not how things work.
Yeah, for sure on that. And, I have to say, in philosophical discussions, inevitably, I find myself agreeing with like most philosophers on most topics, because it seems like there's at least a kernel of truth within all schools or various different philosophical disciplines.
Yeah, and you accept that, you like Boyd, you accept, it could be wrong. And if I'm wrong, I'll
There's
reorient. And
there's that too. You mentioned Ayn Rand though. There's a great Ayn Rand quote. I'm not going to get it precisely right, but she said something like, "You can ignore reality, but you can't ignore the consequences of ignoring reality."
Yeah, it's
I thought, okay, that's good. Right on.
I
Yeah.
actually put a note on Substack about it that like you should read her novels. They're great. I mean, they're very
Yeah.
predictive and prophetic of what's going on in the world right now. And what the one flaw that she had, or well, amongst others, but the one that you seem to be addressing with your work is that she believed that all reality was just purely objective and that there was no there was no wiggle room.
Objectivism. That is her thing. Yeah, right. Yeah.
But we know through Boyd and McLuhan and others that reality is not objective. It's completely subjective based off of your own personal preferences and tastes and fears and emotion and psychology and everything else. And the fact that the world is constantly in a state of flow, and is that you're in, as Ponch would say, you're in a controlled hallucination of it all. So there's no such thing as objective reality.
Yeah. Right. Now, I mean, this is a really critical point to the measures that we're creating, and for the audience, you can just visualize a line chart where up is complex, down is less complex, up and down, up and down, up and down, and it's more about the relative change than it is about the precise measure. Right. And so when there's a large shift in complexity, either direction, we're saying that has an effect on human cognition, because you're changing the variety of activities that people are experiencing with the news. There's like a supply and demand, or like a chicken and the egg kind of thing going on with some of this as well. So we can visualize, or we can identify spikes in news volume. And for like a country, for all the news outlets for country X, there's a big spike in news volume. So maybe there was a natural disaster, like an earthquake or a hurricane or what have you. There's a big spike in news volume, or there's a civil unrest event, and again we can see a big spike in news volume. Why is there a spike in news volume? I mean, really, why would we observe a spike in news volume? Well, one of the reasons I think would be is because, well, these are global news outlets. That's their job, is to report the things that are happening that are meaningful within a country or within a system. But the other reason why they're doing that is they're trying to capture people's attention. They know that something happened, and so this gets into another topic that I wanted to get into that you guys put on the show relatively often, is novelty.
Yeah,
people seek out novelty, and people try to resolve uncertainty. If a bomb goes off within earshot, I'm going to probably go onto social media, or I'm going to go online and say, what the hell happened, right? Or if there's an unrest event, or there's a natural disaster, people are going to go to their news sources and try to resolve that uncertainty. I'm not sure what happened. What the heck is going on, right? And so news outlets are anticipating that, and they are publishing stories as quickly as possible so that they can harvest revenue. That's how they make money, is through people's attention. But you kind of see it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg kind of a thing going on. And all of this gets fed back into the orient cycle, and taking action, resolving uncertainty, going after, seeking, not just seeking out novelty, but resolving novelty.
Yeah.
You start to wonder,
what are your thoughts on all that?
Well, I go back to, I mean, this might be kind of esoteric, but like when I think of what we talked about when you were mentioning Fibonacci and sacred geometry and things like that, the trends that you're talking about, I mean, there are arguments, and there's a lot of research that these things actually do happen in waves, that are.
Yeah, and there's the idea of attractors too. So you get from biology, you get these attractor landscapes, or attractor fitness landscapes with attractors in them, and that's all they are, is just trying to attract attention to it. And that's moving from one phase to another, or however you want to look at it within a complex environment. And the other law I was talking about earlier, I didn't bring it up properly, is the theory of adjacent possibles, right? That's the snowmobile analogy. Is more technology today equals more technology and capability tomorrow. I'm kind of jumping off the topic here, but it's that landscape, that world reality landscape, or whatever you want to call it. You're trying to, if you understand how to get people's attention and collect money off of that, you're creating an attractor, right? And that's really, that's what I think is happening with the news, is they're just following basic laws of nature.
Oh wow,
yeah,
no, that's good.
Tapping into it, like we were talking about. I don't know, Posh, we want to bring up that one topic that we're going to make the video about, but there's platforms out there that are tapping into like the biological tendencies of human breeding.
Yeah.
So
of what human breeding,
human breeding, and keeping the species alive.
Breeding.
Which is a very scientific term of saying that there's too many. There's a lot of content creators out there putting stuff up on the internet that they might not normally have done in times past. But I think that it's something's being tapped into. That's something human is being tapped into by external forces that people are leveraging. So whether kind of like the media, they tap into fear, they tap into and it goes back to, I don't know, I start thinking about that. I think of Marshall McLuhan, like people here in Manhattan are caring about what's going on in Zimbabwe right now, and it has literally nothing to do with the course of their day and their care for their family or whatever.
I've heard the name McLuhan before, but I must say that I'm less familiar with that person's work. What is just the quick 101 on McLuhan?
Like Boyd, he's often misunderstood and reduced, right? So like Boyd is reduced to just OODA loop. McLuhan would be just reduced to his famous phrase, "The medium is the message."
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah.
And what it's been limited to is just communication in mass media theory, but in reality his definition of media is technology and environment. So the parallel with Boyd is really interesting, because our circumstances unfold within our environment, which has a direct effect on how we're oriented. And there's a very nice click with McLuhan. We've had Andrew McLuhan, his grandson, on our podcast. We've done some collabs with him, but that's kind of the idea there, is that he had this other concept, the global village, that electronic technology, electronic media was going to connect us all in such a way where your orientation is going to be hijacked in Manhattan because you're so concerned about people in California, their house burning down, and it has literally nothing to do with anything that you're going to do with that day, or vice versa. A woman getting set on fire in the subway by an illegal immigrant is going to hijack your mindset in Cedar Rapids, Iowa for the day, because this global village, the technology is bringing us together in a bad way.
That's cool. Yeah. So where my mind starts going with that is, so we're doing some work with the Army right now related to information warfare. The Army calls it information advantage, information operations, right? And Moose, I start thinking about like maneuver. Right. And, attention getting hijacked in one area of the information environment, and using that as a fulcrum or a maneuver moment to do something else. And another way of thinking about the measures that we're creating, and this goes back to Shannon's work as well, is thinking about it as noise. So if you have a communication channel, and Shannon developed this very simple model of a communication channel where you have a sender of information, a receiver of information, and there's the channel itself, but into the channel is coming noise. There are things that are coming in, like physical things, like static, perhaps, in this channel. Hopefully, relatively low, but there's also conceptual noise. And so that's the way to think about what we're measuring. We're measuring how much headspace are activities taking up in a global leader or in a local population's head, which can be thought of as conceptual noise. And so if something happens, bang, somewhere in the information environment that gets a lot of people's attention. I'm turning my head as if that's what people are doing in the information environment. No,
Yeah.
but they're actually preoccupied, just like you were saying, Moose, in something that happened, somewhere.
Mhm.
But that gives an opportunity to maneuver and do something elsewhere that would either perhaps go undetected or would otherwise help the blue team pursue their goals.
John, help me build another metaphor analogy here on this topic. So in the world of sport, playing basketball, you're trying to create mismatches, right? You're trying to shimmy one way to get the defender to go in that direction. What I'm hearing from you is these shimmies that are happening in the environment are getting the attention of leaders to look over here, kind of look at an attractor space, whatever it may be. And that knowing that they're looking in that direction is an opportunity. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And on top of that, there's another concept. There's a Wikipedia page on it. It's called recognition prime decision making. Recognition prime decision, RPDM.
Yeah, we know Gary Klein. Yeah, Gary Klein's been on the show.
You do? Okay. Yeah. So I'm unfamiliar with his work other than that, but intuitively, that's the kind of dynamic that I think is possible. I kind of liken it as well to high frequency trading, in that traders identify a moment of arbitrage within global systems. The price of corn is here, 10 cents here, it's 12 cents there. You can arbitrage the difference and very quickly, capture a little bit of gain. That's the kind of tactics that I think are possible with looking at these changes in complex system and arbitraging, cognitively arbitraging these system changes in order to make little incremental advances in influencing populations and leaders so that it redounds to our benefit. And you can kind of start to settle this into the whole OODA loop kind of a methodology. But as I said back up at the top, I think we're taking a much more linear, direct approach into what most people think of as the OODA loop, and like literally trying to orient and do things more quickly within the information environment using this recognition prime decision making.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things about RPD, and so I don't know if you know this, but let me get some names right. John Schmidt, who worked with John Boyd, John Boyd did some mentoring of John Schmidt on maneuver warfare. John Schmidt now works for Gary Klein.
He wrote Warfighting. Yeah,
Warfighting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So John's working for Gary
FM1.
Klein.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So Gary Klein and we sat down and we looked at RPD and the OODA loop, and I said, hey, and this was before I came across the free energy principle. There's a lot of overlap there. Now I would say free energy principle kind of makes RPD obsolete, because now we know from the maths that's involved in the brain and how we do things, particularly from the brain. We now have a better model of how we perceive reality, how we make sense, how we plan, how we make decisions, how we learn and adapt, right? So these are all living systems. The nice connection between RPD, recognition prime decision making, and the OODA loop, I think, is in situational awareness, creating that SA, which to me is really about building that orientation, having that previous experience, so you can have that intuition, you can build that capability up. So I do believe there's a lot of overlap between what you have, how you're looking at RPDM, and of course John Boyd's work, and bringing it all together to help military leaders see what they normally wouldn't see, right? So I do think there's a lot of capability there.
That's why we're calling. I mean, that's why we're calling it cognitive terrain, because you can think of the ups and downs as terrain. But something I neglected to mention closer to the top, but I think it would be a good time to inject it right now, is you bring up the free energy principle. Again, I don't have as nuanced a analysis of this as you guys do, but I think of the free energy principle as, people, systems, or organisms, generally try to minimize the amount of energy that they expend as they are pursuing their goals. And this also gets to one of my early thoughts about measuring the entropy of systems, because I had the notion that of basically driving entropy or exacerbating entropy, and thinking about it almost as like surfing complex systems and using the crests and the valleys, the ups and the downs, almost like using the momentum of the system to your advantage in order to minimize the amount of energy that you are putting into the system. And so, if a enemy combatant or a geopolitical rival, if you can estimate that they are at a moment of relative cognitive overwhelm, or their system is relatively stressed out, as evidenced by the variety of activities that are present at that moment, if you can make that estimate, then what if you were just to pour a little bit more on, just bounce that system a little bit more at these opportunities, and just like stress the adversary out at moments when they're already stressed.
But that's the whole idea of creating a mismatch, though, is that's when we say you're getting inside somebody's OODA loop, is that's what we want to do, is you want to take it, seize the advantage there, which is, again, it's, I'm going to use my basketball analogy. When you watch, Steph Curry or somebody, shimmy to get somebody moving in a direction, that's what they're trying to do, is take advantage of the external environment, help create those conditions that allow them to have lower energy costs of shooting the ball, right?
Yeah.
So, and it may not be the best analogy, but that's exactly what's going on in warfare, right? That's what we want, is we are trying to create mismatches in the environment. And I think what I'm hearing from you is you're trying to identify those mismatches that are naturally occurring, so we can take advantage of it and lower our energy costs when we're trying to defeat an enemy.
That's why we think of complexity as opportunity. I mean, complexity is hard. Complexity introduces challenges. Complexity is something that businesses and organizations have to grapple with. But you can also think about it as opportunity. If you can measure it consistently, then you can identify moments of engagement where you are more likely to have outsized effect, or you can do things to potentially reinforce, your system's success, depending upon how you're measuring things. Yes. I can't hear you. I was saying,
so the application of maneuver warfare inside information warfare is still true. And if you look at a landscape, again, you're looking at the fitness landscape, you're looking for those attractor spaces, what's afforded to you, and you're trying to take advantage of it. So that's still maneuver, right? And I hear people are saying that maneuver warfare is dead. I'm like, no, it's not. It's actually more alive now in the information space than ever.
I don't know if you saw in Substack, I put a note the other day of one of the greatest books on this. I say greatest in the sense of accessibility, is Systems Thinking by William Detmer, which has Boyd, OODA loop, Cynefin framework, maneuver warfare, theory of constraints, you name it. It's all in there, and it's accessible, and it's not the perfect book, but I tell you, for the things that we're talking about, it's a great text to get people moving in this direction. Because I think, to your point, it's like we can leverage this stuff if we understand it, and if we don't try to understand it, we're just going to constantly get rolled by it. The information warfare is a great place. We've been doing a lot more work with PR and other things, and you've got no shortage of opportunities to look at. One that I've been eyeballing lately. In fact, I just got a note from a buddy of mine that's a chief communications officer at a company. I had told him, I said, I predict that Southwest is going to just get completely rolled by this, running away from their tribe with the no more free bags. And he was just saying that on CNBC today, Frontier Airlines is like full assault. Like the CEO is the guest on CEO, and he's going, or CNBC, he's going full assault on offering all kinds of freebies or whatever to steal that tribe away. But it's a fluid environment, and it's not unlike war fighting.
No, it's the same.
It's the same thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe even more so too. Maybe even more so too, in the sense that it's not necessarily kinetic or physical, but the cognitive domain. There's no difference.
Getting inside the OODA loop, right? That's 100%.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's right. Yep. That's why we call what we're doing, cognitive arbitrage, and like trying to identifying moments of, identifying differences in cognitive states faster than your adversary is, so that you can take advantage of that arbitrage opportunity, and doing it over and over and over and over again.
The downside of this, John, is your internal processes, your ability to act on the environment. You have to have a distributed approach to it, meaning that, so go back to mission command, go back to all these things. These things cannot live in isolation. So if you understand the external environment, that's one thing, right? But how you act on it is another. And I think a lot of organizations that, with their hierarchies, their bureaucracies, they're not able to maneuver in that space and take advantage of that. So it's not just one thing. This to me, this is that, I hate to call it the front end of the OODA loop, but it's that sense making piece, right? Making sense of the external environment. And yet you have your internal processes that delay your action. So I think for leaders out there, it's not who can make sense of the environment the fastest. It's the holistic approach to bringing John Boyd's work into this, and who can actually create action.
Yeah, 100%. I have no control over how organizations are adapting to today's competitive landscape. I do know a lot of organizations are talking about doing things faster, the speed of relevance, and speeding decision making. I know that is aspirationally what a lot of organizations are talking about, and our technology is there and ready to go when the organizations get there. And I think that there is a major forcing function going on right now with geopolitical events that our national security, and I'm an American, I'm a retired Marine, I'm a patriot. I believe that our national security apparatus is going there, and they might be forced to get there even faster than where they're currently going. But I have no control over that. But this kind of a capability is at the ready when our national security apparatus gets there.
Let's talk about civilian applications.
Skating to where the puck is heading, if you will. Yeah.
So you're mainly focused on DoD. Are any applications for, let's say, markets? Have you looked at that?
Yeah. Yes, a couple. Well, so you guys mentioned brand management just a moment ago. I do believe that there are applications, especially for large multinational companies that are interested in their global brand, and so being able to identify like moments when they can influence key audiences for their global brand. I think that this is a way of doing that. And back to Shannon's communication channel model, right? If you can estimate the amount of noise that is going into a communication channel, Shannon's answer to countering noise is to reduce the entropy of a message that is going into the channel in order for that message to have a better opportunity to get through to the intended receiver. So measuring the noise that's coming into a channel, you can modulate the message based upon the noise. And so in like a social media advertising models, one of the things that we're looking at doing, and would love to talk to anybody who thinks that we could test this kind of a thing, but would be to measure the conceptual entropy of someone's social media feed. Right. Yeah. You're looking at shorts, you're looking at posts, on and on and on, measuring the entropy of that feed, and then, serving up an ad to that person based upon the most recent noisiness of their social media feed. And this would be the kind of thing that would have to be, tested, very, in some very structured A/B kind of a test kind of a way, in order to see if there's any kind of model lift from adjusting the entropy of advertising based upon the noise of someone's social media feed. But the same kind of thing could be done at a more macro level for, global brand management. So those are the kinds of commercial applications that
So,
we're
the,
looking at.
the future applications sounds to me like just going through a simulation here. As AI becomes more prevalent in our day-to-day lives, as we're known more to the external environment, our activities and how we think, the the path that you're on is going to be more. It's going to provide more opportunity, right? There are many unknowns out there that, and again, this goes back to the basic idea that if you want to understand the disposition of a system, you don't interpret it. You have the people, you federate it out, you ask people what's going on, you collect the insights, and using a red team technique or think, write, share, that's kind of what you're doing here, using chaos theory, separating all these agents from each other and collecting information from them. That's how chaos works for us in a novel way, and that's what you're doing. The same approach, this is, to me, this is on the path to creating better awareness of what's happening in a system. It may not be perfect right now because you don't have perfect data, right? You don't have it.
Never will.
As
Yes.
yeah, we never will. But this is a path. So
Yeah.
I want to throw a couple of ideas out to you about patterns, and I want to get your thoughts on this. So music, when we can, as humans, we can anticipate after a few beats of a song and just hearing a few things, we can anticipate where the song's going, and we understand when it should change based off of patterns, right? Because music is kind of within I'll call it within our DNA. It's within our biology. It's within the universe. So we can recognize these patterns early on. So these patterns exist. So there are tractor spaces out there based off musical notes, melody, tempo, and all these other things. So humans are pattern matching beings. We also project vibrations into the world. So by just the act of observing something, we can change it. There's ideas that, this whole oneness of consciousness, that we're all one conscious being, which is possible, that we're all projecting things into the environment. So if that's true, an organization that can tap into that early and get those insights is worth a lot. And I think I'm going to get your thoughts on that. Are you tracking any of that and how your technology can help identify those potential patterns?
I was not tracking that, but I think it's a really interesting hypothesis. What I heard you describing is what I've heard someone, or Carl Friston, describes that also as inactivism with an E, inactivism, where it also sounds to me like a cybernetics way of looking at the world, in that the world is affecting us and we are simultaneously affecting the world, and in such a way we are co-creating reality. It is really easy to take that concept and go towards the kind of woo world where you just think it and it manifests. I am what's the word? Not skeptical. I'm not. I am. I'm receptive to that as long as it includes action. So I mean, just merely thinking about a time machine is not going to manifest a time machine. But if I think about a time machine and I put the effort in to actually do the work and build a snowmobile, right? Build a time machine, then okay. But in such a way, you're kind of co-creating reality. Or it's like, but someone could argue, it's like, well, if millions of people are thinking, billions of people have thought about creating time machine before, and we, humanity or creation, just hasn't created it yet. But it is it's in the soil. It's something that is percolating in there. The concept of a time machine exists, and because the concept exists, someday people or AI or somebody is going to figure out how to actually manifest that. So it just hasn't happened yet. So yeah, what is the delta between thinking something and having that manifesting? And there's there's different deltas depending
Mm-hmm.
on, like, I can think about picking up my cup of coffee and having a sip. Wow, that was momentary, but
Right.
manifesting a time machine is different. So that's kind of where my thought goes with all of that. But I've also thought about, but I'm not sure that our technology has anything to contribute to this. But harvesting dreams, or or turning dream time into a more productive time, or dreams are already productive, I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
because they're a necessary part of our human existence. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing them. I think if there was not an evolutionary and a breeding reason for doing it, right? So dreams exist for a reason, but how can we more, not productively, how can we more intentionally go into dream states in order to have it be something that helps us pursue our goals more? Anyway, when you were
Psychedelics.
I was thinking the same thing. If you could capture the narrative in
yeah.
psychedelics with the patterns, you might find
Okay.
extraterrestrial beings, and who knows what we'll find.
Well, but I can see how, if you go about some of these uh, uh, projects, dreaming, or taking psychedelics, if you do it with the right kind of intention or something like that, I can see how that could really leapfrog, or put you in a better competitive posture
Yeah.
in the real world, or
It's
in
just how we
real life.
change perspectives. It's
Yeah.
just
So
it's reorienting.
we were trying to
Yeah.
put Dave Snowden and SenseMaker into the psychedelic assisted therapy space because they're using traditional approaches to capturing what's going on, right? So, and to me, surveys and things like that don't work. And I think you and I talked about this years ago. So the disposition of the system matters, and that's what I think. And if anybody from the psychedelic assisted therapy community is listening to this, I think what John has could be useful, as is things like SenseMaker, using a narrative-based approach to capture the self-signifying ideas of what just happened underneath a psychedelic assisted therapy experience, a yoga experience, and things like that. Collecting these things independently and collecting that data gives you a system, the fitness landscape of a system, to understand where the attractor spaces are. And then from there, you can actually understand what's possible. So that new novelty can emerge. And I think that's exactly what you're trying to do now, is the same application or similar application to the, I'm not going to call it the real world, but the world consensus reality space, if you want to call it that. So John, hey,
the world consensus reality space. Yeah.
There's, I tell you, there's some amazing things coming out of the psychedelic assisted therapy research, because they're using complex adaptive systems, the free energy principle. I'd argue that they're using a lot of OODA loop for it to understand what's going on. So they're the ones that are talking about the things that I think a lot of military leaders ought to be talking about, because it's the same. It's maneuver, right?
Right. And things do get really blurry when we're talking like this. I mean, I think you're right to be precise about what we're talking about, because the real world is, in a way, that it's just our sensory. It's just the way we're sensing the world, which has distortions and is not literally reality. So all that.
Hey, anything you want to cover? Anything that we left unturned today? Anything you want to look at?
Well, there is another commercial application of another project that we're kicking off right now is taking this exact same technology that I've been spending time describing for modeling the global news and event ecosystem, but also using it to monitor forestry and wetlands, and the changing dynamics of these kinds of systems as well. And so rather than looking at global news events, we're looking at activities or events that are evident within, like, hyperspectral or multispectral imagery that is being collected over forestry and wetland systems, and modeling the changing complexity of chemical compounds and making inferences about tree health. And the outfit that we're working with is in Mississippi, and they're interested in measuring the recovery of wetland ecosystems after, say, like a natural disaster, like a Gulf oil spill kind of a thing. And so measuring the recovery of these kinds of ecosystems using the exact same technology. So all of it is, all of this nests under the bumper sticker of situational awareness and from a complexity perspective.
Now, again, there's so many applications that I can think of, just from data science and what's happening relative to AI and how important it is to have good data, right? Context, and how important context is with data as well.
Right. You mentioned music. I mean, I'm a huge music lover, and I know you guys talk about like jazz and getting into the flow. I mean, I love music, but I can't stand jazz. And
tell me more about that.
Well, I know that there's got to be something to it, right? Otherwise, millions of people wouldn't love jazz, but I just don't get it. Maybe I'm not getting into the flow, but it's like noise to me. And I've watched audiences like getting into a jazz ensemble, riffing, and they're jamming, they're grooving off of one another, and I can see people in the audience like just having like moments of ecstasy when certain things happen, or like one player like riffs and the other player takes up and stuff like that. But I'm just like, I don't know. I think
it's an acquired taste. I think just like anything, it'll call to you. And I don't think you need to force one. You don't need to force different modalities on the folks. You need to let them find out what they're again, attractor space, right? So I want to share something with you that it just popped
I was
up.
just going to say, to John's point, jazz is the Marine Corps of music. It's because it's improvise, adapt, and overcome, the whole thing.
Okay. What do we got here? What did you pull
this
up?
is just it's sacred geometry applied to John Coltrane's music. So
really,
and this has popped up yesterday. Again, it's the patterns again, but these patterns just don't exist in jazz. They exist in sport. They exist in nature. And again, I think to answer your question, just because somebody doesn't like jazz doesn't mean they're not a good person. It just means I don't like jazz, right? I used to like jazz. I'm going to tell you, I'll be honest here, and I'll let Mark fill. Grateful Dead. I've tried listening to them. I just don't get it. But doesn't mean I'm not musically inclined, because I love jazz.
It doesn't mean you're a bad person.
Right.
I like the Grateful Dead as well, but I tend to like their songs that are I tend to like their songs that are a little bit more bounded. I don't like the whole album side of Dark Star or whatever.
So think of Grateful Dead. So I'll just keep overusing this analogy. Think of them as the Marine Corps of rock, right? So, but like totally adaptive, totally improvising, totally breaking all the rules, like all following a very clear intent. And also too, I mean, from a tribal aspect, like I get people ask me all the time, "Oh, you must go like to see Dead and Company." I'm like, no, I'm not going to pay $450 to see that. It totally defeats the spirit of what it was.
To see a derivative band.
Yeah, well, like some of the members are still there that are alive, but with John Mayer as the lead. But the problem is that, again, it's like a Ticketmaster over commercialized thing, which is anti-Grateful Dead. Grateful Dead was more sort of emergent, like it was an emergent complex adaptive system that sort of built tribes around it, not a canned. That's what's unique about them. And when I've written a lot in the Substack about them, because that book, The Marketing Lessons of the Grateful Dead, I mean, it's everything that we talk about. It's emergent, it's bottom up, it's intent driven, it's basically OODA loop.
They also gave away their music, right? They encouraged or allowed and encouraged fans to record their concerts, and it's just like, bring it on.
Yeah, the opposite. total opposite of the. If you do
Oh,
a Taylor Swift concert, you're going to get arrested.
Right. There was a analogy here with I. I think that there's okay. So yes to all of that. Even if I've got different likes about jazz and the Grateful Dead, I get the point. And I think that there's you can extrapolate all of this out. I mean I'm think about national security all the time, but you can extrapolate that out to national security as well. And from a I don't know, like a monetary transactional model of geopolitics to more of like an osmosis or an influence model of geopolitics, right? And so the Grateful Dead captured lightning in the bottle, but it was cultural and it was of its time and things like that. And I don't know. I mean, thinking about the United States post World War II, we were the I mean, we fought for it, obviously, but we have I don't know, we basically took stewardship of the Western Enlightenment experiment, and part of our success, I think, was our culture, like exporting our culture to the world. And that's not all just monetary, or it's not all like hammer and nail. There's a organic, emergent kind of a dynamic that was part of that success and part of infusing the world with our influence. But now, the kinds of stuff that I hear about, there was a podcast that I just listened to yesterday. I'm forgetting exactly what it was, but thinking about like what's happening in Ukraine and the EU, the way the EU is looking at the problem is they're looking at it more like transactionals. Like, well, we'll help fund the war effort for 800 billion euros or whatever it is. Lots of money, but it's like we're going to fund success instead of trying to organically influence and win in that way. So I don't know. In that kind of a way, I'm, just trying to extrapolate that music, jazz, Grateful Dead example. I'm not sure whether that's making any sense at all.
I get it.
Everybody has a taste or a preference.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, my kids are listening to horrible music.
That goes back to what we talked about earlier. It's all nuanced. You can't over aggregate and determine, mathematically or formulaically like the Keynesians and everybody else does.
Yes.
You can't do that.
Yes. Right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. No, I'm a big fan of Hayek for sure, and that things have to be emergent, and you can't measure things precisely, and you have to accept it. You have to accept that this kind of imprecision. Do your best with what you have, and just go for it thoughtfully.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's another podcast. We could do a whole show on Hayek.
Yeah.
I mean, the Hayek Boyd connections, and Boyd did use the fatal conceit as one of his late sources of patterns of conflict.
Have you guys had much discussion about Gen AI and LLMs and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, we've had at least from the free energy principles side, we've had folks on the show that. So let me map this out. I think you understand. You're familiar with Cognition framework, right? The Cognition framework.
It's been a while, loosely. Yeah. Yeah.
So you get clear, complicated, complex, chaotic, and of course you get disorder or confusion in the center. So if
different quadrants with like something in the middle that's kind of unique.
Yeah. So confusion in the middle. So the idea is if you take like LLMs are, to me, John Boyd's bad OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act, right? It doesn't have an external connection out there other than the person that's put it in there. And again, it's where do you put the boundary on the system? The Agentic AI, so we got a lot of Agentic AI folks using John Boyd's observe, orient, decide, act loop. And what they're trying to do is use, again, bad OODA loop and scaling that. No, it's okay. We're not saying that's wrong. We're just saying, hey, look, that was not the intent of John Boyd's work. He didn't spend 40 years looking at something to come up with a circle and go, here's John Boyd's OODA loop. No, he looked at complex adaptive systems thinking, cybernetics, physics, quantum physics, all these things, right? So it's a
Right.
nonlinear approach.
His that famous OODA loop sketch
Mhm.
was actually very very late in his
Yeah.
life. What was it not? Okay.
Yeah, 95, 96, right? Yeah. So
Yeah.
actually, we're going to talk to Chet here soon to go over his latest, the essence of winning and losing, his new update, because he's adding information and energy to that conversation. Which, if you look at the OODA loop as a flow system from the constructal law standpoint, then the currency that flows through it is information or energy. Just the very things you and I were talking about today. So going back to LLMs, they're stochastic parrots that are repeating things that are given into them in a fixed data set, right? You get into agentic AI, starting to scaling a little bit more, a little bit less energy potentially, and you get into I think it's called regenerative. It's RGM, or active inference AI, which is John Boyd's real OODA loop, which reduces the energy requirements, which reduces requirements for large data centers potentially, which is a challenge, which is a huge challenge to the current assumptions in the market, which is we need nuclear power plants, we need more energy, we need all these things. So you want to talk about weak signal detection. If this technology works, if and it sounds like it does, then these LLMs and this agentic AI that's emerging right now are going to be obsolete. We're going to see a phase shift basically overnight. So again, this is what we're tracking here. I don't think a lot of people would agree with us, but based on what we're from our guests coming on the show and talking about what's happening, using natural approaches to AI, so modeling what the brain does the best we can and applying it to AI. I think what we're about to see is going to be absolutely phenomenal, which would actually make your world a lot easier, your technology, your approach easier, because you'll have better access to higher quality data.
Yeah, I'm tracking everything except for making LLMs obsolete. I'm not understanding the jump.
Yeah, so LLMs are good in the clear domain. So going back, clear and complicated domain. Relationship between cause and effect. There's a little bit of hallucination. It's a ordered domain approach to AI. It's good. It's really good. So going back to Cognition framework, the land of subject matter experts is the complicated domain. That's where you and I learn how to fly aircraft. That's how we do. Not everybody can fly an aircraft. If Mark jumps in the cockpit, it's going to be a complex environment for him where he's not going to know how to do anything. Whereas
it's going to be Pandalarium.
Right. So subject matter expertise works. You get a repeatable process. You learn how to fly. That's the complicated domain. That's where agentic AI is kind of maneuvering into right now.
I see.
But the complex domain is where you and I, all of us, dominate, which because we're complex adaptive systems. That novelty emerges. There's that liminal space in there that could be used to train AI, and that's it's a complex approach to creating agents, if I'll just put it that way, that are using things like recognition, prime decision making, the OODA loop, and free energy principle to navigate the external world. And that is a lower energy requirement because they're engaging with the external world and they're learning and they're updating their orientation, and they're not being fed a shit ton of information into their data sets. So now they're adaptive. They're adaptive agents in this environment. They're not going to be like humans. I mean, I don't want them to be, but that's the next generation. So that could be a phase shift that we see in the next 6 to 9 months to 3 years. I don't know.
I see. Yeah, in some of our current Army work, we did experiment with using LLM prediction technology, and we didn't do it so robustly that I want to make a really strong statement here, but it didn't work. But I know that there are a lot of people that are looking at LLM technology for like time series prediction, and I think that the best that they're going to be able to do is whatever the next couple of time steps are. But there are techniques already that are forecasting techniques that do a little bit of time prediction, and you don't need LLM technology for that.
No, I'm not saying the LLMs are bad. I'm
No,
saying
no,
they're
no,
actually
no,
very
no,
useful. But
no.
I think to be honest with you, and maybe we ought to work on this together. And we need to explain. And in the flow system, I use the OODA loop, the dominant parts of the OODA loop in different domains of the Cognition framework. It doesn't say that you don't use the whole OODA loop. It just says, hey, when you sense, act, respond, what are you trying to do there? You're going through the implicit guidance control pathway of the OODA loop. You're bypassing the deliberate decision making because it's an automatic thing. It's automation, right? So that pathway through the OODA loop already exists. And then you go to the complicated domain, you go to the complex domain. I believe what needs to happen, and I'm happy to work on this with anybody on the pod, listen to the podcast, is let's take the Cognition framework, either linear Cognition or the regular Cognition approach, and kind of show people what LLMs look like, what agentic AI looks like in this next generation of artificial intelligence. And what we get out of that, you can actually do this on a Wardley map too, is you'll find that novelty will look more like the modeling of the human brain. Again, we're not saying we can model the human brain. I don't think we'll ever be able to do that. I don't want to do that. It's just saying what we know. And let's go back to John Boyd's OODA loop. All the work that John Boyd gave us, if we understand it correctly, I'm not talking about the warfare piece. I'm talking about all the science he looked at, philosophy and all that, all the overlapping, the consilience of it. If you look at that and you tried to build an AI off of the real OODA loop, you're going to dominate everybody that's building AI off the linear observe, orient, decide, act passive approach.
I see.
Yeah.
Back to the novelty. I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's ways, I'm sure, of modeling this more precisely or productively or adequately. That's not the right word. Appropriately, but there. Eventually, if what you're doing is working today, eventually that is going to stop working because of the way the world is evolving and the enemy or your competition is also evolving. So you have to develop novel engagement modalities or tactics in order to continue the competition. And this gets back to the law of requisite variety. You must develop new varieties of tactics in order to continue to outcompeting your adversary. And
let's build this. Let's do this right. So 100% take your technology and let's take a recent scenario after DeepSeek R1 dropped, right? The news media that came out those days, hey, lower energy requirements, whatever it may be. If I understand your tech right, you could capture that those days afterwards and see a potential shift in the way people are thinking. And then later on, a couple of weeks after DeepSeek comes out, Microsoft drops its requirement for bigger data centers. There's a lower requirement for energy capabilities. So what I believe is happening, and what you can do with that technology you have, is you can identify those moments where there's some entropy in the system.
Yeah, right? like almost like an entropy seam or a gap.
Yeah, but better yet, how would you find the weak signals prior to that news getting out, that DeepSeek came out and their energy requirements was lower? Somebody knew beforehand, right? And that's the novelty we have to go after with these technologies, whatever it may be. So my point is, the practical application for what you have, married with the requisite variety that you just brought up, is you have to anticipate what's next. So the tactics, if you want to call them, we'll call them strategies. The strategy that Microsoft put out there weeks ago was, we need bigger data centers, we need more energy, we need all these things. That shifted immediately after DeepSeek. Are they related? I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
But I believe there's a weak signal in the industry now that we do not need the energy or data requirements that we thought we needed, especially if we're going in towards this. There's another. So and if you could capture that, let me paint another picture here. You just gave investors, traders, a competitive advantage, right?
Yeah.
That and for those that are listening to this, that's why things that John's working on could be applied to market shifts, right?
Yep. Yep.
Right. It's
Yep.
a weak signal.
100%.
It could be a weak signal. Yeah.
100%. Yeah, I've talked with a guy before about applying this technology within the patent and trademark database
Mm-hmm.
to get these kinds of leading indicator signals of things that are being developed, and it's patents by their very nature are novel and are not part of the corpus of existing data, right? Because it's assembling, it's I mean, they're all snowmobiles, right? They're all building something novel on top of what things that have already been built. But I do believe that it's possible to identify these kinds of market signals, say like within the patent corpus, which is commercially available data.
Yeah. I mean, this is just fascinating. What I think we can do with the knowledge that we're sharing on No Way Out is, I mean, Mark and I are busy. I know Mark has something to do today, which is pretty novel. And we could talk more about this offline when we're not recording, and I think we should.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, I'm fired up about what you have going on. I didn't agree with you several years ago. I'm like, you can't map this out, and it's mainly because I didn't understand it. Right?
Well, that's part of the entrepreneurial journey. It's just like, oh yeah, well, watch this.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess I'm of the entrepreneurial variety, or the type of person that is, I don't have a chip on my shoulder, but I do have a drive to. I know that what we're doing has relevance and applications in the real world, and I'm driven to see that agenda through, and so that is part of what's driving me. So yeah. So thank you. I mean, and having conversations with guys like you, Ponch, that inject a little skepticism. I mean, that's okay. That just makes the kinds of arguments that I make better, because all of that feeds back into, it's like, well, how do I take this constructive criticism and resolve it so that what we're doing is more clearly productive?
Well, it makes sense now, man. It really does. I really do appreciate the dialogue and the conversation today. Let's wrap it up there. Anything else from Moose or John?
Solid stuff, man.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate y'all having me into the forum. Like I said, I've been looking forward to doing this for quite some time. And to your last point there, Ponch, I was like, until maybe just recently, the way that I describe what we're doing and some of the applications, it might have just been like, hey, this guy's saying just the same thing as he did to me a couple of years ago. And so thinking about things a little bit differently, and it's more obvious that what we're doing has real world applications.
We can help.
That's right.
Yeah. All right, John.
Awesome.
We'll wrap it up there. Thanks, man.
Yep.